Today I would like to recommend some good old books to you, and not just good old books, but like really, really good and old books, because they are classics. I was an English major, and I know that sometimes classics are a huge snooze fest. There are plenty of books that I was assigned to read back in university and I could not be bothered to finish them, but there are also some classics that are absolutely spectacular and compelling and so fun to read, and it's like, damn, like these books were written like hundreds of years ago, but you can still relate to it and feel what the characters are feeling, despite it taking place in environments and societies that are so distant from what we're used to experiencing. That does not mean that a classic cannot be enjoyed in today's present time. Anyway, if you're a beginner and you want some books that aren't too intimidating and easy to get through, then I have some books for you. The first book that I'd like to recommend is The Great Gatsby. I read this book for the first time when I was in high school, and it wasn't even for an assigned reading. I think I just read it for fun. And it was actually the first classic, you could say, that I fell in love with, because I didn't even know classics could be fun like this. So this book is about a guy, his name is Nick. He moves to Long Island, where a bunch of rich people live. This is the 1920s, by the way, I forgot to mention that. This is in the 1920s. And so Nick comes across his super rich cousin Daisy and her husband Tom, and he also comes across this strange and mysterious man named Gatsby who throws these super extremely extravagant parties every Saturday. And the more Nick gets to know this man named Gatsby, he realizes this man has achieved everything he wanted in terms of wealth. Like, he's achieved the American dream. However, he is pining after Nick's cousin Daisy, who lives across the lake from him. This book is pretty short, and it's also pretty enticing because it draws you in with these depictions of wealth and status and extravaganza and like the hype of the 1920s. It was called the Roaring Twenties. But when you really look into it, you realize that this, this depiction of the American dream is muddled with so much betrayal and money hunger and sadness and melancholy, and I like that you get a really deep look into that world, and I believe that's what Fitzgerald was critiquing when he wrote this book. The next book I recommend is a little bit more gross. I like to say it's not as beautiful as The Great Gatsby, and that is The Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka. This book has been turned into a meme. So this book is about a man named Gregor Samsa, and he is a traveling salesman. He doesn't really like his job, it's pretty boring, and he's constantly thinking about like a life that he could have lived. Anyway, he wakes up one morning and he realizes that he's been turned into a giant bug. He can't roll over on his side, he doesn't have his hands anymore, he can't open the door to unlock it. He's just a bug. And it's really funny because like the book starts off with this man realizing he's a bug, and then his boss comes to his house looking for him, and then, Samsa like opens the door, like he's like struggling to open the door, and then he goes to say hi to him, and then his boss is scared and runs away, and then his dad's scared and like beats him up with a cane and pushes him back into his room, and then he just has to live the rest of his days as a bug. And that's just what the entire book is. It's just this man living his life as an eternal bug. And I know that sounds like kind of like funny, but it is actually kind of sad. You get to learn more about his thoughts and how he believes his family and his loved ones perceive him, which is as a burden or as disgusting and repulsive. I believe this could be a metaphor for perhaps how Kafka himself maybe perceived himself and his role in his family. I just feel like this book was just really weird and absurd, and it wasn't like so absurd that you wanted to stop reading because you were compelled to keep reading it. It was just so intriguing. It was just so weird that you want to know what happens next. Like, what else happens in his life as a bug? It's really interesting. I really liked it. I recommend. The next book is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. This is a classic, a lot of people's favorites, and also very, very famous and popular. Mary Shelley wrote this book when she was a teenager, and it was so spectacularly written that I am jealous. I'm so much older than her than when she wrote this book, and I would love to write something like this one day. Well, not exactly like this, but something this good. Now, Frankenstein, if you are unfamiliar, is actually the name of the scientist who created the monster. The monster doesn't really have a name. We follow the story of the scientist after he creates this monster, and then he realizes he made a huge mistake, and now this monster is constantly chasing him because this monster wants a mate. He wants some humanity. He wants to feel love and acceptance, but his creator hates him and is constantly running away from him. And now this monster is like, well, if you hate me and you're not gonna make a mate for me, then I am just gonna wreak chaos and havoc and revenge upon you, good sir. It's basically the monster haunting this scientist for what this scientist has done, and this monster basically making this scientist hate his life and everything he's created. Very, very interesting dynamic. But yeah, I thought it was really good because even though the monster is also very bad, he's not a good person doing good things, I really felt for him. I really felt for the monster. It made you really think about like human dynamics and emotions and how we all need to feel loved and accepted, and I thought that this was a very interesting and metaphorical look at that. And now to think about it, actually the Metamorphosis and Frankenstein kind of have similar themes, which is that there are unlovable non-human characters who just want their humanity but accept that they're never going to be loved. I just realized there's a connection there. The next book that I would like to recommend that is completely different in terms of tone than the last couple of books I recommended is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. Now, I have to make a disclaimer for this one, despite the fact that I did read this book like 3 or 4 times because it is very good. It is kind of slow. It's not necessarily a page turner where you're like at the edge of the seat and you just can't wait to know what happens next, but it is a very sweet and relaxing read. Like, I enjoy spending time with these characters and I enjoy being in their world, though it does move a little bit slower, if I'm being honest. But it's still not that slow, so it's still enjoyable to read. But it's about a family of 2 parents and 5 girls named the Bennets, and the 2 eldest Bennet daughters are of marrying age, which means that they are now out in the world looking for suitors. And this book is basically just about the miscommunications and misunderstandings that happen as these girls pursue or don't pursue their love interests. Our main character is a girl named Elizabeth, and she's considered the more plain, non-interesting one, I guess, to her family. And she comes across this man named Mr. Darcy, he seems very unlikable and unapproachable, and like he hates the world at first, but then over time though they are quite intrigued with each other and they may or may not love each other. It's kind of funny because I actually hadn't seen the 2005 adaptation with Keira Knightley until much later. I actually read this book first, and it came out 200 years ago. In the same breath that I'm recommending this though, I more strongly recommend Persuasion. Persuasion by Jane Austen. Oh my god. Oh my god. Now this I really, really, really recommend. I can't even pinpoint why I liked this book so much better, or why this is actually my favorite Jane Austen novel based on all the Jane Austen novels I read. And I think it's because the love story just felt so much more poignant in a way, and the main character, she's so relatable, and I get her. I just feel like I get her so much. And there's actually a quote from this book that I came across and I thought that it was so beautiful, and that is, "You pierce my soul. I am half agony, half hope." Oh my god, like, it's so good. It's so good. And okay, the quote is much fuller than that, but I don't want to explain any more as to not spoil it. It's about this girl. She comes from a affluent family, as do most Jane Austen's characters, but she is the middle child out of her 3 sisters, and she once fell in love with someone who was technically below her status 8 years ago, and she was persuaded by people who were close to her into not marrying this man. And now 8 years later, this man has made a name for himself and he's back, and she has not forgotten him. She had still been in love with him in all this time, and now it's just the question of, did he love her all this time? Who knows? There was just something so beautiful about this book, and I think out of all the classics I'm recommending today, this is my absolute favorite one. So if you are going to read one of them, you should read this one. And that is all I have to say. The next book that I would like to recommend, and this one's a bit more of like a fun one, this one's kind of scandalous, and that is The Scarlet Letter. The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne. I read this for my American Lit class, and I didn't think I'd like it, but I actually very much liked it. It's about this woman, and her name is Hester. And mind you, this is set in Boston, I think, in the 17th century, so this is about a woman who lives in a settler colony, and a very Puritan colony, and so as her husband is lost at sea, she becomes pregnant and has a child. because she got pregnant and had an affair, she was punished by society by being forced to wear a scarlet A for adulterer on her clothing to show the world that she is an adulterer and she's sinful and a very bad person, whatever. And no matter how much people ask her for the identity of the father, she just never gives it up. And people make a lot of rumors about her child, which is this little girl named Pearl, and they're all like, well, is she the spawn of the devil? And honestly, I kind of wish that she was. I think that'd be really fun. I think that'd be really fun if the child was the spawn of the devil, but no, she's not. Anyway, as it turns out, her husband actually was not dead at sea. He was there all along. He just had a different identity. And he gets like really mad that she had a lover, and he's like obsessed with finding out who her lover is, and it's just so scandalous. The next book I'd like to recommend is The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. Now, Oscar Wilde had lived a pretty intense life because he was a gay man and was punished for it. It's about this painter, his name's Basil, and he comes across a very, very, very beautiful man named Dorian Gray. And so Basil, the artist, decides to paint a portrait of him. What he doesn't know is that Dorian Gray is obsessed with youth and beauty and wealth and money, and he just wants to stay young forever. He basically undergoes this curse where he like sells his soul to this painting. He wants to be young and beautiful forever, and all his sinfulness will go to the painting. He basically lives out his life full of like hedonism and does very morally bad things, and is just a full-on horrible person. But because he's so young and beautiful looking, everyone forgives him. Everyone's like, oh, but he's just so good looking, he's just so beautiful, like no way he's a bad person. And so he just like lives the next couple of decades just doing the most awful things, and as he stays the same, he remains youthful and beautiful. The painting which he hides away portrays all his ugliness. If you go back to the painting is ugly and disgusting and horrifying to look at, and that is the reflection of his soul and what he's been doing all these years. I really like this book because I like that it kind of flips the, oh, like good people are good looking on the outside and bad people are bad looking on the outside thing on its head. I just think the entire premise is really interesting. I never heard or read anything quite like it, and it's also fun. The next book I'd like to recommend is quite compelling. However, it is not fun per se, because that is The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath, and this book is full of depression and sadness. I read this book when I was in university. I read this from my American Lit class, and I fell in love with it because I fully related to the main character. This book came out in the 1960s, by the way. And it follows a woman who is in college, and despite her life going places which look great on paper, she is so depressed, and it's really hard for her to form connections with people that really understand her. And yeah, she just really struggles in her life, and it's mostly about her navigating her depression while living in New York and being a college student who's just going through the most. This book is very good, but I do believe that you need to be in the right headspace to really get into it and to appreciate it for what it is, because it is a little sad compared to the other books. However, I heavily recommend this book. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope that you got something out of it. I hope that you found a new book that you would like to read. Again, the classics are not scary or intimidating. Sometimes they're purely fun, and sometimes they're scandalous, and sometimes they're crazy. I think letting yourself deep dive into them is really fun, and you learn so much about the world, and you also realize, like, you know, people even hundreds of years ago were all the same. Like, people back then, people right now, we're all the same. Anyway, thank you for watching this video, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!